Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are. This is Arthur Brandwood, the founder and principal consultant of Brandwood Biomedical. Welcome to this month's Brandwood Live webinar on a China update, what's new with the CFDA. The webinar today will be given by Stephen Wen, the Director of China Operations in our Beijing office with the marvels of the internet. I'm sitting here in our Sydney headquarters and Stephen's sitting in our Beijing office, and will join us shortly to present the webinar. Stephen has more than 20 years experience in Chinese medical device and IVD regulatory affairs and working with the Chinese authorities. He's held previous senior roles in Medtronic, GE Healthcare, Bausch & Lomb, and also worked for a small startup medical device firm. So we've seen it from all ends of the business. Before we begin, I'd just like to say a couple of words about Brandwood Biomedical. If I can persuade this slideshow to work, there we go. We're a medical devices and IVDs regulatory reimbursement and clinical consultancy, and we really try to bring a global perspective to what we do. We have offices here in Sydney and in China, also in New Zealand, Hong Kong, and Taiwan, and a global network of trusted partners that we work with to deliver a global service to our clients. To do that, we think it's important to do two things. Firstly, to be highly engaged with the industry and with the regulators, and to be highly networked. That means that we do things like we provide training and support to regulatory agencies, we provide input to guidance and policy development, and we support industry associations to do that. Stephen and I, for example, both get involved with the China FDA through setting up their CIMDR meeting. We get involved with the Asian Harmonization Working Party, and here in Australia support our industry associations, us biotech, to deal with TGA. That's important because it means that we then have a much clearer understanding of what's going on in the industry, understanding of the regulator's perspective, and they get to know us, and that builds a position of trust and credibility. So that's a little bit about the way we do business as a firm, and the kind of outlook we have. But enough of that. I'd like to move on to the webinar. Just a little bit of housekeeping. You should be looking at a screen, something like this. This webinar is live. Stephen's just about to be ready to start. You should see a little control panel with a little orange arrow on it. If you click the orange arrow, the control panel will expand. And if you have a question as we go through, type it into this little box here where it says enter a question for staff. We'll receive all of those questions, and then at the end of the webinar we'll go through as many of them as we can, so that we can do a live Q&A with Stephen at the end. If we don't get through them all, we will still have all the questions, and everybody will receive at the end an email with a link to the slides and a recording of the webinar, and also we'll compile a written response to all the Q&A so that all the questions do get answered. So without that, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our Director of China Operations, Stephen Wen, who's going to talk about a China update, what's new with the CFDA, and we're really talking about what's happened over the last year. We did one of these updates in March last year. This is an update since what's happened since then. So Stephen, I'm now going to hand over control to you and let you present your webinar.
Yeah, thanks, Arthur, for your introduction. Hello, everyone. This is Stephen from Brandwood Biomedical China office. I'm very pleased to share with you some latest updates from China regulatory agencies since this March. So today, I'm going to talk about 6 topics as below. So first is about the revision to the Decree 650 and the Order 25, which is the GCP implementation. And the second wave of clinical exemption list and the prioritized device evaluation pathway and the updates of the innovative evaluation pathway. And lastly, it's about China new Rojas requirements. So first, let's take a look at the revision to Decree 650. As you all have known, Decree 650 is a framework regulation which covers all aspects of medical device administration, such as registration, clinical evaluation, post-market surveillance, etc. So on May 4, 2016, CFDA had published a draft of revised articles to Decree 650 and asked for comments. All these revised articles about regulating the large medical equipment purchasing. The purpose is to assure the large medical equipment are distributed evenly across the country and are fully utilized in order to avoid any waste investment or negative competition among the hospitals. So what's a large medical equipment? It refers to those big-sized equipment with complicated technology, very expensive price, high cost of operating, or the big impact to medical expense. So those large medical equipment will be put into a particular administration catalog in the near future. Those medical institutes want to purchase a large equipment. They first need to get a permission from their local provincial administration of public health. If they fail to do so, they will receive penalty from their local government. However, how soon can CFDA publish the catalog of such a large medical equipment? And what's the time frame and the cost to get such purchasing permission are not clear at this stage. So this is about the proposed revision to the Decree 650. Second, let's talk about the new Order 25, which is the GCP requirements. The GCP requirements had already become effective on June 1st this year. GCP replaced the old Order 5 about clinical study for medical device in China. GCP means good clinical practice. It covers not only the clinical study process, but also the responsibility of the sponsor, the medical institute, and the ethics committee. In general, I would say China GCP is quite in line with the global practice. So what are the main changes brought by GCP against the old Order 5? So hereby we provide you both the full text for you to read later and the key points summary for you easy to read by now. So first of all, so in past, the clinical study need to start within half year after the local type testing is done. Now you can start within 1 year after the testing is done. And second, for those brand new devices, the GCP asks for a pilot study with a comparatively smaller sample size before the statistically valid pivotal study. So in past, the Order 5 only asked for animal study for the new implantable device. No pilot study required. And you can see under the new regulation, any clinical study protocol need to be filed to local provincial level CFDA and to a certain types of high-risk class 3 devices. The protocol need to be approved by CFDA beforehand. In past, it only requests the protocol of the class 3 implantable device to be filed to CMDE, the evaluation center of the CFDA. However, the procedure to do this was never made clear. The new GCP requirements that the sample device for clinical study must be produced under a relevant quality management system. This is a new requirement. In past, the Order 5 didn't mention anything about the quality management system. And the new GCP specified the concept and the requirements of the multi-center clinical study. The multi-center study refers to the clinical study to be carried out by 3 or above institutes. All the institutes will conduct study upon the same protocol at the same time. And there must be one coordinating investigator who is responsible for implementation along with the sponsor. The study sample size and the distribution ratio between the sites must be justified by the sponsor and with a statistical rationale. And lastly, the data management and analysis need to be done centrally by the leading institute. This is about the requirements of a multi-center study in China. And the GCP specified the responsibilities of the ethics committee. This is new. And lastly, GCP requests the clinical institute to keep the study documents for at least 10 years, and the sponsor shall keep the documents until the device is not used in market anymore. This is longer than before. So next topic is about the second wave of the clinical exemption list. As we introduced on our last webinar, if your device is already been put into the exemption list, then you don't need to do the clinical study in China or writing a clinical evaluation report according to the CFDA's guidance. You just need to make a comparison to the device description in the exemption list and make another comparison to a substantially equivalent device which had already been used in China. Then you can do the submission. The Wave 1 exemption list, which was published on October 1st, 2014, included 488 Class 2 devices and 79 Class 3 devices. Now, CFDA had posted the draft of the Wave 2 exemption list on May 20, 2016, which include 259 Class 2 and 93 Class 3 devices. We anticipate the Wave 2 exemption list will be officially released in the next few months or so. So we are keep our eyes on this progress. Next topic is very interesting. CFDA is proposing a prioritized evaluation pathway for medical device. The draft proposal was released on June 21st, 2016. So how to get your device prioritized? You need to meet any of the 3 conditions below. So first condition, from the R&D priority area, your device is set as the important scientific R&D project at state level. Second condition is from clinical priority area. If your device is to treat or diagnose some rare or urgent disease, and there is no alternative or replacement therapy, such as cancer for pediatrics or some Asian people, those very rare disease. The last one is still to be defined by CFDA yet. So how to request for a prioritized evaluation pathway? You can file your request with your final registration submission dossier to CFDA. So in case of the condition 1, so CFDA will make judgment within 5 working days. in case of condition 2, CFDA will make monthly review to judge so which one are qualified to get into the prioritized pathway. It's interesting to make a comparison against the innovative pathway and the prioritized pathway. There are some differences. In terms of the condition, the innovative pathway requests the patent registration in China, and it more focusing on the innovative technology with the clinical advantage. And the prioritized pathway requests the state-level R&D project, the clinical urgency, no equivalent device, and the clinical advantage. So in terms of the request procedure, you need to understand that in innovative pathway, you have to raise your request before the registration submission. And in prioritized pathway, you can raise the request along with the registration submission. In terms of the CFDA decision timeframe, the innovative pathway will need more than 40 working days for CFDA to make the decision. In prioritized pathway, as we just mentioned, for condition 1, they will need 5 working days to make the decision, and in condition 2, they will do the monthly review. One advantage of the innovative pathway is that it will provide CFD pre-consultation before the submission, which is not available for the prioritized pathway. And both pathways will be prioritized for the technical evaluation. So this is a general comparison between the innovative pathway and the prioritized pathway. So next, let's look at the current status of the innovative pathway. So as we introduced on our last webinar, so innovative pathway has a significant advantage against the common review pathway. Just like we mentioned, the CFDA will assign a single contact person to manage the review, and you can have the pre-consultation before the submission, which is not possible for common pathway. Since the innovative pathway had been implemented in March 2014, so up to date there were totally 67 devices had been qualified to get into the innovative pathway. So among those, 63 are local devices and 4 are import devices. A few of them had already been approved. So for example, I know there's a drug eluting balloon from one local company had already been approved. So among the 4 import devices get into the innovative pathway, 2 examples are, one is from Abbott, the biological absorbent stent. Another one is Medtronic's leadless pacemakers. In past, so people believe that the innovative pathways are only favorable to the local manufacturers. But now we have seen that in some cases that the multinationals can also get the innovative pathway. Our last topic for today is the China Rojas 2, which is also very, very critical to the manufacturers. This requirement is released by a number of the government departments jointly, including the China Ministry of Information and Industry, or MII, and the National Development and Reform Commission, NDRC, and a number of other important government agencies. The Rojas 2 requirements replaced the old China Rojas 1 requirement, which was released in 2006. So there are a few critical definitions. The definition of Rojas and the hazardous substance are same as before. So for example, the Rojas means a restriction of hazardous substance in electrical and electronic products. But the definition of the electrical and electronic products has changed a little bit. It's set to the equipment with the voltage under 1,500 watts DC or 1,000 watts AC. So this is the definitions about the China Rojas requirements. The content limits of the hazardous substance is still same as before. The difference is that China will publish a product list for mandatory compliance shortly. It means so any products get into the list must make sure the hazardous substance be lower than the limit set above. The China Rojas labeling requirements is unique around the world. You can say there are two logos. One is green, one is orange. The green logo is used on products without hazardous substance, or the contents of the hazardous substance are below the limit. Otherwise, you have to put on the orange logo. The number in the middle of the orange logo represents the years that the products could be safely used. If the orange logo is used, you also need to put a table in the user manual to indicate the name of the hazardous substance content in each part of the device. You can see in the table that the letter O means this hazardous substance doesn't exist in this part. The letter X means this substance exists in this part. You can refer to some China local standards to check the details of the Rojas content limit, labeling requirements, or test method. So for example, for the content limit, you can refer to the China local standard GBT 26572-2011, which is the requirements of the concentration limits for the certain restricted substance in electrical and electronic products. And for the labeling requirements, you can check the standard ISJ/T11364 2014, so which is requirements about the logos and the tables. So what's the changes against the old China Rojas requirements? So first, you can see that the scope of the requirements had been expanded from the electronic information products to electrical and electronic products. So the scope is much broader. And a mandatory compliance list will be published. Any products in this mandatory compliance list must have the hazardous substance below the limit. Under the old requirements, there was a key inspection list, but now it's removed. So this is the comparison to the old China Rojas requirements. So what's the difference to the EU Rojas requirements? So first, China has a mandatory compliance list, where EU requirements doesn't have such a mandatory compliance list. And China Rojas requirements doesn't have an exemption provision as the EU requirements. So in terms of the compliance evidence, China will request not only the design and the manufacturing documents, but also the labeling information, as we just introduced earlier, the logo plus the content table in user manual. So what's the actions for the suppliers of the electrical and electronic products, including the medical device? So first, the suppliers of the electrical and electronic products need to collect the hazardous substance content information from their upstream suppliers of all parts. For any products produced after July 1st, 2016, you must put the green or orange Rojas logo and include a hazardous substance content table in the user manual for orange logo. Otherwise, you might have trouble while importing the products, because the China custom and the AQ/SIQ, so they will start to inspect the compliance of the Rojas logo and the information. And lastly, so once the mandatory compliance list is published in the near future, the suppliers of the enlisted products need to take measures to make sure the hazardous substance content in those products are down to the limit, and they can only use green logo on those products. Okay, that's all for today. So thanks for any questions.
Thank you, Stephen. That's a fascinating introduction, and it never ceases to amaze me how much change happens in China. Almost every week there's a new change coming out of CFDA or one of the government agencies. A bunch of questions have emerged. I'd just like to take the chairman's prerogative and ask the first one. Firstly, while we do the presentation, I'm just going to change the screen. Here we go. Just a moment. So I'd like to ask Stephen first, just generally, what are the 2 or 3 biggest impacts with all these GCP changes? There's a lot of detail there, but if you're a manufacturer trying to enter China and bring a clinical trial, what are the biggest impacts, Stephen? What's maybe the 2 or 3 things that you really need to be aware of?
Good question, Arthur. So first of all, so I believe that GCP will definitely increase the quality standard of conducting clinical study in China, because it formalizes the process and sets more specific responsibilities of all the involved stakeholders, like the sponsor, ethics committee, and the medical institutes. And second, so during the review cycle, so CFDA may come back to check the compliance of the GCP, including the completion and the accuracy or the authenticity of the documents, including the original records, the firms, or the study protocols or ethics committee approvals, etc. So both the medical institute and the sponsor must be very cautious to make sure their operation during the clinical study are in compliance with the GCP.
Okay.
And lastly, sorry, pardon?
Carry on.
Yeah, so I mean, so as a result, so we also anticipate the cost and the time the sponsor spent in the clinical study in China will significantly, increase.
Indeed, indeed. I'm sure it will. A bunch of questions from our audience. So, firstly, Tony asks a question: how do you get your device into the clinical exemption list?
Very good question. Yeah, I think the best you can do is to keep your eyes on the progress and talk to your reviewers as much as possible. Because the mechanism to make the exemption list is like this. So it's primarily drafted by the reviewers collectively. So many reviewers have the right to nominate some products. So for example, the Division 1 in the CMDE are responsible for the active device. The Division 2 are responsible for the non-active implantable device, right? So every reviewer has the right to nominate some products if she or he believes this product doesn't need clinical study.
It reinforces what we were saying earlier about the need to be engaged with the regulator and talking to them, so that if you're working with them, then you stand a better chance of being considered for entry onto the list.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. So more importantly, so once the initial draft of the next wave list is ready, so the CMDE will host some roundtable meetings by inviting the industry representatives to discuss the draft. That's a good opportunity for you to raise your requests. So try to join those meetings as much as possible and explain the necessity to adding your device into the list. This is the best approach I would recommend.
And I'm sure that those are announced on the CFDA website, and you'd know when they were, and if people wanted to find out about that, they could ask you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Joanne asks a question, and the prioritized device pathways. Wanted to come to that. Joanne asks, you said one of the conditions, the first condition, is to be considered as an important R&D project at the state level. Can you explain that? How do you get? What does that mean, and how do you become an important state level R&D priority?
Yeah, good question. Yeah. So at this stage, so people believe this condition is more favorable to the local players. So the mechanism is like this. So every year, so the China Ministry of Science and Technology will review and set up some state-level R&D projects about medical device. So most of the projects will be taken by university or institute, but some of them are taken by companies. So in addition to the prioritized evaluation pathway proposed by CFDA, the owner of each project will also receive finance sponsorship from the central government. So for example, in 2016, the Ministry of the Science and Technology has set up 69 state-level R&D projects for medical device. There were totally 16 local companies participate in 19 projects. They have already received sponsorship, ranges from like 10 million RMB to even 200 million RMB from the central government. And they will enjoy the prioritized evaluation pathway in the near future, I believe. Yeah.
So to do this, you really have to be engaged with research activities in China, and I would suspect you have to partner with a local university or something like that, and then enter the R&D funding pathway, and then that gives you some priority in the regulatory outcomes as well. Okay, thank you. That's clear. Thank you. Let me see what other questions we've got here. Danica asks a couple of questions, actually. Danica asks about ROS labeling. So, is the labeling for ROS expected to be on the device itself or just on the packaging?
Good question. So, ideally, the logo need to be on the device itself where possible. However, to some device with the smaller size, or for the implantable device, for example, for the pacemaker stent, it's not realistic to put the logo on the device itself, right? So you can put on the box as well.
Right. So
external equipment, external big equipment, you need to put the logo on the device.
Okay, understood. And does Stuart asks again about roast. So does roast 2 apply to spare parts or just the finished device?
Good question. So my understanding of the requirements is if that's the system, you need to put the logo on both the main machine and those individually packaged parts, because it's possible. So that in case of the systems that different parts or different unit, the machine may have different Rojas table, Rojas logo. For example, the main machine is with the green logo. It's possible, but some parts, some individually packaged parts, may have to use the orange logo because it does has the hazardous.
Or the other way around, you may have some parts which are free of the hazardous components, but the whole machine requires the orange logo. Okay, understood. So it does apply to the separately supplied spare parts. Let me just see if we got any other. Okay, coming to the the innovative device pathway. Nancy asks a question. Says, have any of the 4 imported devices have any of them been approved yet?
I believe not. It's because the innovative pathway you start by very early stage, right? So before the submission. So as far as I know, so no, not approved. Just get into the innovative pathway list, but not even submitted yet.
Right. I think there are some submissions have been made, but I don't know. So we've not seen any actual approvals for importers at this stage.
Right.
Okay.
Well, one point, one critical point about innovative pathway is that so any products in the innovative pathway need to do the clinical study in China. So you need to understand this, that once you request an innovative pathway, it means that you are ready to do the clinical study in China.
Okay.
That takes time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. Abby, welcome, Abby. Abby asks a question. Abby, I know, is in Toronto, and I know Abby's in Toronto because Abby used to be one of our employees here in Brandwood Biomedical and is now based in Toronto. Welcome to the webinar. And Abby asked the question, where can the list of state-level projects be accessed? Is it available online? Is that information available, these state-level and R&D projects?
Yes, the information are open. If necessary, so we can provide a list.
Okay, in the email that we'll send around, maybe we can provide a link and send that on. Okay, thank you. Jeremy asks, coming back to clinical trials again now, under the Order 25 for multi-center trials, it mentions that sites must start at the same time. How precise is that, Stephen? How much flexibility? Because clearly not everybody's going to start on precisely the same day. I understand that the intent is that they should be broadly contemporary, but not exactly the same. Is that right?
Right, I think so. It doesn't mean that you must start at the same day, but in general, it needs to go in parallel according to your protocol.
Thank you, thank you. So it's a broad requirement that all sites are working at roughly the same time. Okay. Now, again on clinical studies, Danica asks another question. If the device does not have a clinical study in the country of origin where it was manufactured, what information do you require for registration?
It depends. So as we introduced, there are three pathways to submit clinical evidence, right? So it's possible that your device had never done any clinical study in your own country. It's possible, right? But in case that your device had already been put into the exemption list in China, so for example, there are many simple class 2 device has already been put into the exemption list. and you don't have the clinical study report in your own country. It doesn't matter. So you can, as far as it's in the exemption list, you can just follow the requirements, just make a comparison to the comparison list and the substantially equivalent device in China.
Yes.
Yeah. And second pathway is even your device is not in the exemption list, but you can make a comparison to another substantially equivalent device which had already been used in China. You can write a CER, clinical evaluation report. It's not a mandatory requirement that you must do any clinical study in your own country.
Okay, thank you. Let me just see, what other questions we got? Yes, another question. ROS came into effect on the 1st of July. Do companies need to do anything now, or do they wait until this mandatory list is published?
Yes, of course. They need to take actions by now. So they need to put the correct logo and the table in the menu. So whatever the green logo or the orange logo. The mandatory compliance list means that for any product get into the list, you must take measures to reduce the hazardous substance down to the limit. So for example, if you have one product, now you can use the orange logo. But once it's been put into the compliance list, you must take some actions to change some parts or something to assure the content limits are reduced down to the limit. So second step. You understand?
Yes, I do. Okay, so thank you. I think that answers that question. Let me just see a couple more questions here. Yes, coming back to the innovative pathway, but thinking specifically about clinical trials, if you go down the innovative device pathway, Nancy asks a question, I think I know the answer to this one. If you go down the innovative device pathway, does that mean you've got to do a local clinical trial? And my understanding is yes. Is that correct? That if you're applying for an innovative device priority, then that pathway requires a clinical trial. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. So on a training course held by CFDA clearly stressed that for the innovative pathway, you have to do the clinical study in China. But it's interesting that during the pre-consultation for the innovative products, you might have the opportunity to negotiate how to do the clinical study in China, because I heard that it might be feasible that you do the multi-center, global multi-center study, including China, for those innovative pathway. Yeah, which is not which is not possible for common pathway.
Okay, interesting. So there may be some flexibility, and that's helpful because you've got this opportunity for pre-consultation. Good. Okay. Let me just see. And again, on the clinical pathway, Stephanie asked a question. Can you discuss a little bit what the reality is? Is CFDA really accepting the use of equivalence or clinical evaluation reports, or are they forcing people into the clinical trial despite that pathway existing? So what's the reality? Is it really possible to use a clinical evaluation report, and is CFDA accepting that approach?
I would say yes, because there are some companies, they have already been passed the evaluation by submitting the CER. Right. But mostly, so those companies are like GE Healthcare or some, they have quite good, the predicate device information in China. So that's the basis. They have device approved and used in China for a long time. They have good traceability about all the device information to make the comparison.
Okay. Can I ask a follow-up question on that specific thing? So how good does the information have to be about the predicate device? Can you use a competitor's device, or really does this only work when you own the predicate? Is one of your own devices? How does that work? How much do you need to know about the predicate?
So far, CFD strongly prefer your own predicate device, because their point of view is that if you use the competitor's device, so how you make sure that the information are sufficient and accurate? Because they ask you to make a very, very detailed comparison. Mm-hmm. So like the production process or something. So how can you get those information from a competitor? So if you use the competitor information, they will ask you to submit a formal agreement with the competitor that you are used those information legally, but it's very difficult. You can imagine that, right?
Thank you. Okay. Yes. So really, it's easier if you're using your own device as a predicate. If it's somebody else's, then you've got a bit of a job to do to justify that you've got enough information and complete information. Okay. Quick one on GCP guidelines. Manish asks, are the GCP guidelines available in English? I don't believe they are, but and I know we've attempted a simple translation here, but we've not published anything. Are the guidelines available in English at the moment, or do you have to get them and do a Google Translate yourself?
For GCP, GCP, yes, we do have a few versions of the English translation. It's done by some companies or the China Medical Association or something. But to be honest, as I read, the quality is the translation quality is not perfect. But anyway, that's good for reference. We can share with you that.
Okay, so we'll perhaps send around a link for an English language version. Coming back to Roche, another question here. Danica asks, is this requirement for Roche, is it a CFDA registration requirement, or is it primarily an import requirement? So who's going to police Roche?
No, this is not from CFDA. It's from the, as we shown on the slide, it's from a number of the other agencies jointly. But that's very, very important, because those agencies, those government agencies, including the China Ministry of the Custom and the AQSIQ. Right. AQSIQ is the administration of the
quarantine service.
So yeah, they go to check the Rojas compliance during the importation inspection. So this is very, very serious.
Okay, so this is something you have to get right, because it will be checked as it enters the country. Okay. Question from Ray. Make sure I understand this. Do product renewals submitted now need to have the same? This is a more general question. Do product renewals which are submitted now need to have exactly the same models and things like pack sizes registered as was in the original, or can this be generic? I think the question, and it applies for class 2 and 3 devices. So if you've got an existing registration which perhaps declares particular sizes or so on, do you have to have exactly the same, or can you make it more general when you renew?
No. So actually, theoretically, you cannot make any changes to the products, including even the description or the model numbers or something. So the products and the submission scope must be exactly the same as the initial approval. The only exception is you can delete some models or remove some parts, but you cannot change anything or add anything. The only thing you can do is you can say some of the models are obsoleted, so I can remove that from license. That's the only thing you can do.
Okay.
Yeah. For any other changes, you need to go for the product change pathway.
Okay, and what would be, Stephen, what would be your recommendation? So say a manufacturer intends to introduce maybe a new size, a new pack size, or a new variant, and they're coming up for renewal. Should they do the variation first and then do the renewal, or should they introduce the changes in the renewal? What's the best way to do this?
So first of all, so you cannot combine those technical change along with the renewal submission. You have to separately. You can do in parallel or one before another. So it's up to you. So the principle is so which one is approved first. So which one can be implemented. So it means that if the renewal is approved first, you can continue to sell exactly the same products as before. You cannot sell the variant. You cannot sell the new products, right?
Okay.
So once the technical change application is approved, you can start to.
I see. So that's a separate application which runs alongside, and it can be before or after. Okay, that's clear. Yeah. Thank you. Here's an interesting one from Ram. He's asking, can the device? Can you seek an exemption from clinical trials? I'm assuming if there are two distinct devices in China which together cover the intended use. So this is a bit analogous to the US FDA's idea of multiple predicates. And I know that United States FDA over the last couple of years has really clamped down and doesn't like multiple predicates anymore. So what about in China? If you've got two devices in the marketplace which sort of together cover the intended use of yours, is that possible?
Yes. So you can compare to multiple predicate device.
Right. So that is possible. Okay. Thank you. And CFDA accept that and are comfortable with that?
Yes. I think it's covered by the guidance. It does mention that you can compare to predicate device, multiple predicate device for the full indication, right? For the full intended of use.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do that.
Okay. Thank you. A couple more questions. We've talked about standards here a few times. Where do you look for standards, Stephen? They're available online, or where do you get these China standards?
Yes. So if you know exactly the name and the number of the standards, so you can search on website. There are some Chinese websites they can offer even the free download of the standard. There's some library you can do that. And we can also help out.
We can provide a link to that in the email response. A question on the mandatory list that we're waiting on the mandatory Roche list. Do you have any idea of what medical devices are likely to appear on this mandatory list?
Sorry, no. So we have no idea.
No idea. There's not been any consultation or anything on that at all. Okay. Finally, maybe I'll just ask one last question. I wouldn't mind if you went over again the three pathways, because we went through them fairly briefly in the webinar. So there's the pathway if you're in the exemption list, the pathway if you're not in the list but you've got access to a predicate, and the third pathway is if you're not in the list and there's no access to a predicate, or there is no predicate. Can you just outline again what you must do in each of those three cases?
Okay. Yeah, sure, of course. So the first pathway is the exemption list, right? So once your product had already been put into the exemption list, you need to do two comparison table. So first comparison table is against the definition in the exemption list. So for example, the X-ray machine, definition, what's X-ray machine? You just need to make a comparison to justify. So my device is the X-ray machine,
okay,
right? So the second is another comparison table is compared to a predicate device. But here it's very, very critical to remember that in case of exemption list, you can compare to the competitor's predicate device. Here the comparison is comparatively simple. For example, you can compare to your competitor's X-ray machine.
Mm-hmm.
Which is, but the condition is that machine, the X-ray machine, must be approved and used in China. Is that clear?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
So, yeah, this is the pass 1. So the pass 2 is that your product is not in the exemption list, but you have your own predicate device in China. So for example, the pacemaker. The pacemaker is a high-risk device. It's not in the exemption list, but I have my predicate pacemaker approved and used in China. Then I need to write a CER. So the first part of the CER would be a detailed comparison against the predicate pacemaker. Much more information than the simple comparison table for the exemption list. Then you need to do the literature search. You need to summarize the post-market surveillance data or something to compose the CER or submission. So this is a pass 2. So the pass 3 is that your product is not in the exemption list, and you don't have any predicate device approved in China. So for example, for the drug, eluting stent, it's a brand new technology. You don't have any predicate device. This is your first generation of such product in China. Then you have to do the clinical study in China. Okay. So that's the 3 pathway.
Thank you. That's very clear. Thank you. Okay, I think we'll wind up at that point. Thank you, Stephen. That's been a fascinating discussion and an awful lot going on, as I think everybody will agree. We will distribute by email to everybody who's registered a link to the slides, a link to the recording of this webinar, and we'll do an email summary mail out to everybody on the Q&A just to make sure we've captured all those questions. I look forward to meeting some of you. Just wanted to point out that we will be at Brandwood Biomedical will be at a couple of large meetings in the near future, so I'm looking forward to going to Chengdu in a few weeks' time in September, where we're running a biocompatibility forum. That's a particularly interesting event. That's one of the world's largest regulatory events these days. Well over 1,000 people attend the China International Medical Devices Regulatory Forum, and that also includes a bunch of subfora where we run one on biocompatibility. We've taken some of the lead experts from the ISO committee that write the 10993 standards to China for the last 2 CIMDRs. This is the 3rd time we're doing it. So that's really the only place in the world where all of those experts together and do a workshop on biocompatibility. So that's an interesting thing. And then in the following week in San Jose, California, in Silicon Valley, we'll be at the RAPS meeting, America's largest regulatory affairs gathering, where a couple of us are presenting. My colleague Grant Bennett's going to be giving a presentation on labeling requirements in this part of the world in the Asia Pacific, and I get to participate in the Conversations That Matter session with a panel talking about the interrelation with policy and regulation. We'll be there with a booth. Stop by at booth 105. Look forward to seeing you there. Thank you again, Stephen. A really good webinar, and thank you so much to our audience for listening. We've had quite a large number of attendees this time round, and good day to you all.